And I'm going to talk to you about some common pitfalls that can happen when you're working on your budget justification. So the first one is obvious, miscalculation. So if you are working from an Excel spreadsheet, which is how I most often did it when I was working in pre-award, if your budget spreadsheet has a broken or poorly constructed formula, it is amazing how easily that can get translated into your budget justification, and it can cause you issues. We already touched on the second one a little bit, talking about the misalignment between your research objectives and your budget, that can cause problems for you. Um, if you don't have enough information there to justify why your cost is allowable, as Becky was talking about just a second ago, that could raise some questions as well. So you want to be able to explain the why, the how, and how it really is necessary and reasonable for you to have the thing that you're asking for. What do we mean by documentation when we're talking about a budget justification? That's a word that's often very, very popular in post-award, but you don't hear it as much in pre-award. When we say documentation in this context, what we're talking about is things like equipment quotes. Some sponsors want to see those when you're submitting your budget. Others are happy knowing that you have one, that your cost estimate is based on a quotation from a manufacturer or more than one. But that documentation is important because it gives you a more solid basis for what you're asking for. Another common pitfall could be not calling out specific hot topic items that you need for your project. Things that might be a little unusual and that your post award team is likely to question if it's not addressed post award. These are things that your sponsor is also likely to question when it comes time to review your budget for award. So, one really big example that I found when researching for a previous presentation at another time, there was a faculty member who was requesting, I believe it was 3 jet skis to perform some research, and it was obviously water based research. And they hadn't necessarily clarified entirely the purpose and the need and why these were reasonable. But what happened was it turned out that these were allowable and the sponsor did approve them because the work that they were doing required that certain pieces of equipment be actually physically mounted onto these jet skis, and they had to drill holes in them. And so the PI had to come back and explain, well, we can't rent them because the rental company really frowns on drilling holes in their equipment. So it's actually much less expensive and more efficient and reasonable for us to purchase these for use on the research and then for them to be used for future projects after this one's over. So that's an example of hot topic items. Another is food. Food costs come up constantly. And knowing what your sponsor specific policies are on that. There are some sponsors that are incredibly strict, and there are other sponsors that are not. It's very helpful from the post award perspective to know that yes, you have specifically outlined what you need in terms of if you're hosting a conference, if you are um, feeding participants who are coming in on travel status, all sorts of things that need to be spelled out. It just makes everything a lot easier. What other pitfalls are there? Obviously, unallowable cost would be a pitfall. If you're not aware of what's unallowable and something sneaks through in your budget justification, generally we don't ask for things that aren't allowable. But there are also things, as you know, if you've been in research administration for more than a few days, that things that you would think are always unallowable, like alcohol, are at times allowable for other purposes. So if you are a researcher who researches alcohol or behavior surrounding alcohol, then of course it's going to be a supply and it's not necessarily going to be that unallowable thing. So we've already also talked about the last two just a little bit, but I'm going to belabor the point just a little bit. If you have not followed your sponsor's guidelines, you're going to have a bad time. So it's really important to make sure that you read that stuff, that you follow those rules, and that you have dotted every I and crossed every T. Okay, so would be an example of a communication breakdown for in the context of your budget justification? Well, one thing could be based around what our poll said. Who's writing the thing? Is there one person writing it, or is one person putting down the basics and then someone else coming back and talking about what might need to be added? Like, yes, and we need this, and this is why. um, Sometimes when we are, especially when we're working on very short timelines, which can happen in pre-award, our communication is the first thing to suffer. So we need to make sure that we are communicating among the team so that all of the reviews that need to happen, and that everyone is on the same page, and we make sure to have enough sets of eyes and enough time for everyone to adequately take in and digest the information to make sure we are submitting the best possible product for funding.